While Navy Reservist John McCready was away on duty, the HOA declared his dock abandoned and tried to seize it. Their leader, Karen Ellison, saw his absence as a chance to boost her listings and ignored every legal boundary. But John had something they didn't expect: a Coast Guard permit and federal law on his side. Just wait until you see how this quiet veteran turned the whole board silent and made justice permanent. The sun was just rising over Oyster Bay when John McCready stepped onto his back porch for the first time in 4 months. His boots sank into the dew-wet boards like they belonged there, just like him. The air smelled like salt and pine, and for a moment it felt like peace. After months aboard a gray metal hull, this quiet stretch of Florida shoreline was everything he'd been looking forward to, until he saw the zip-tied plastic notice flapping in the breeze. It was bright orange, fastened tight to one of the old pilings on his dock. The dock he'd spent an entire summer building with his own hands. The header screamed, "Notice of violation," and underneath it, in cold clipped wording, was a bombshell. The dock was considered abandoned. It had 10 days to be removed before it would be reclaimed by the community for recreational access. John stood there for a full minute, just staring. The same dock where his son had caught his first redfish. The same dock where he used to take his coffee in the morning and let the silence do the healing that doctors couldn't. How could something so personal, something sitting squarely on land he owned, be declared abandoned? He marched back inside and dug through his files until he found the deed. Lot hash 42, with waterfront access and dock rights. It was in his name, paid off, not rented, not shared, his. He'd paid the taxes, done the maintenance, pulled permits back in 2015 when he rebuilt the pilings after Hurricane Hermine. It wasn't just a dock, it was his boundary line, between sanity and chaos. But while he'd been gone serving his country, something had shifted. The HOA board had changed. A new group had taken over, led by Karen Ellison, a local real estate agent with a reputation for cleaning up the neighborhood and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She and her allies had wasted no time. Buried deep in a newsletter he never received, they'd pushed through a revision to the community plat map. Suddenly, without a single letter sent to his name, the land under his dock had been reclassified as common area, based on a decades-old landscaping covenant no one had enforced since the Reagan era. To them, his dock wasn't private property anymore. It was underutilized waterfront potential. To John, it was a line crossed and a declaration of war he never asked for. John didn't go in swinging. That wasn't his way. He believed in order, in process. So at the next HOA meeting, he showed up in a clean shirt and calm voice, holding a folder thick with proof, a copy of his deed, updated tax statements, repair invoices, and time-stamped photos showing the dock being used and maintained for years. He thought reason would be enough. Karen Ellison barely looked up from her tablet. She didn't even ask to see the documents. Instead, she glanced across the table with a half smirk and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You were gone too long, John. If you can't take care of your property, someone else will." The room went quiet. A few board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. It got worse from there. Karen started floating big ideas in the next HOA newsletter, talking about community waterfront revitalization and how unclaimed assets like John's dock could become gathering spaces for sunset socials, paddleboard launches, and weekend yoga sessions. John tried to reassert his claim. He posted a small, respectful sign at the foot of the dock. "Private property, no trespassing, McCready, family use only." Within 48 hours, it was gone. In its place, the HOA left a new notice: violation unauthorized signage, $500 fine for community disruption. They called it an eyesore that made residents feel unwelcome, as if he was the intruder, not the man who'd lived there since the community was nothing but scrub pine and dirt roads. Word started spreading through the neighborhood. Quiet, cautious conversations on sidewalks and driveways. A few of his neighbors, the old-timers who remembered when John poured the concrete for the dock himself, hinted that Karen was working behind the scenes. Rumor had it she'd already listed 3 townhomes on her real estate site with exclusive waterfront access included in the description. She wasn't just claiming the dock. She was using it as a bargaining chip to boost her listings and line her pocket. John kept his cool, but inside something cracked. Not out of pride, but out of principle. Karen saw his deployment as an opportunity, his absence as weakness. What she didn't know was that John had spent years navigating federal red tape, learning exactly how bureaucracies move and how to make them stop. And now she'd picked a fight with someone who understood how to fight back by the book and win. John didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just got to work. His fury didn't come out as noise. It came out as paperwork. The first thing he did was pull up the Coast Guard portal. Years ago, when he added solar lights to the edge of his dock, he'd applied for a PATIN, a private aid to navigation permit. Most people didn't even know that was a thing. But John had served on ships where every blinking light had a purpose. He'd filed it properly, and during his last leave, he'd even updated the permit's metadata to reflect the dock's GPS coordinates and structural upgrades. The document was still active, still valid, still registered in his name. He picked up the phone and called Lieutenant Rourke, a friend from his early days in the reserves, now stationed in District 8's Waterways Division. By the end of the week, the HOA received a letter from the U.S. Coast Guard. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a cease and desist order for unauthorized interference with federally permitted navigation structure. That dock was no longer just wooden pilings. It was now a piece of maritime infrastructure. But John wasn't done. He unrolled his original property survey, the same one filed with the county when he bought the land, and loaded it into a digital overlay with the public GIS records. What the HOA had tried to do was redraw property boundaries based on outdated documents and vague wording. But the current data didn't lie. The dock and the narrow strip of land leading to it fell well within his deeded lot. He filed a formal challenge with the county recorder's office, attaching certified survey documents, tax records, and copies of the plat revisions the HOA had quietly submitted. It took less than a week. The ruling came back sharp and final. The HOA board had acted outside the scope of its statutory authority by attempting to reassign private property as community access. The plat change was invalidated. Any use of the dock by the HOA would now constitute trespassing. But John wasn't just looking to defend himself. He wanted a firewall. He submitted a request to have the dock formally reclassified under Federal Maritime Code, not just as a local structure, but as a protected point under navigational standards. Once approved, the Coast Guard re-permitted the dock in John's name for 30 years. It was now logged in the National Patent Registry with a unique identifier, flagged for priority if ever tampered with. That meant no one, not an HOA board, not a neighbor, not even a state agency, could alter, remove, or reclaim the dock without triggering a federal investigation. It was no longer just personal property. It was now protected infrastructure under U.S. jurisdiction and absolutely untouchable. The next HOA meeting was packed. Folding chairs scraped across the clubhouse floor as residents filed in, some out of curiosity, others out of loyalty or guilt. Karen Ellison was seated at the head of the table, tapping her pen against a stack of notes, rehearsing what she clearly thought would be her next polished statement on reclaiming community space. But halfway through roll call, 2 uniformed officers from the Coast Guard's local liaison unit stepped through the double doors, crisp folders in hand. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. They calmly presented the board with federal registration documents confirming the dock's patent status, its classification under Maritime Navigational Code, and the 30-year permit secured in John McCready's name. The officers also included a formal advisory. Any future attempts to restrict, alter, or claim the dock without federal coordination could result in legal action under Title 33 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Karen's face went pale. For once, she had nothing to say. The HOA board sat frozen as the officers left the paperwork on the table and exited as quietly as they came. No drama, no debate, just the weight of federal authority making its point. Within days, the HOA formally rescinded every fine they'd levied against John. The plat map revision was scrubbed from county records, the dock was reinstated on official zoning files as private property, and a compliance notice was filed acknowledging the board had acted outside its authority. John didn't give any speeches. He didn't have to. The dock now stood prouder than ever, fresh planks, clean pilings, and a new weatherproof sign bolted to the entry gate. Federally registered private navigational structure, U.S. Coast Guard ID, #823 FLO 42, property of John McCready. Neighbors who had once looked the other way now stopped by to shake his hand. Some brought homemade bread. One left a thank you note in his mailbox. People remembered what he stood for and why it mattered. As for Karen, her listings disappeared from every real estate site within 3 weeks. Her brokerage quietly dropped her, citing pending legal complications. By the time the next HOA newsletter came out, she had resigned from the board, citing personal reasons. That night, John sat on the edge of his dock, a cold drink in hand, listening to the soft lap of water against the pilings. The lights he'd installed years ago blinked gently across the bay, steady and calm. He didn't just protect what was his. He set a line in the sand and made sure no one would ever try to erase it again,